platforms, if you will, that are collecting data. We call them observations. Those consist of a network of buoys, the weather buoys that are sitting in the ocean. We certainly have satellite data that does what we call remote sensing of the ocean. Let's see, we have on board the satellites have various sensors that we can kind of detect kind of what's going on the ocean. We also have near shore meteorological observations at certain airports and certain sites. We also have a suite of what we call numerical weather models. They're basically mathematical models that provide an outlook of what the current situation of the atmosphere is, and basically gives a forecast all the way up to 7 days. So we kind of use that as our guide for forecasting. We also have a network of observations that kind of come in. Besides our buoys, those can be sometimes ship observations from ships transiting the area. Sometimes on land, those are, I'm calling near shore, along the immediate coastline. Those can be our volunteer weather spotters, airport data, sometimes just even the public gives us observations of important weather parameters that reach certain thresholds.
Lieutenant Woods, please display Coast Guard Exhibit 27, page number 5. Mr. Wild, for your benefit and for the public's benefit, Exhibit 27, page 5 is the National Weather Service forecast for coastal waters from Cascade Head, Florence, Oregon, 10 to 60 nautical miles from the date of January 8th, 2019. Briefly, would you please talk about the type of forecasts that are available for mariners working off the coast, off the coastal waters of Oregon?
Okay, so could you repeat the question again?
Yes, sir.
The latter part of it?
In general terms, because I do intend to ask you more specifically, in general terms, I'm asking for the type of forecasts for mariners working in these waters around Newport, Oregon.
Okay, so basically it's what we call our coastal waters forecast. So it's the same jurisdiction I spoke of before, and we kind of break our marine zones into our coastal waters into 4 zones. Basically the coastline up to 10 nautical miles, and then from 10 nautical miles up to 60 nautical miles. Beyond 60 nautical miles, there are forecasts still available there from our Ocean Prediction Center, which comes out of NOAA's National Weather Service facility in Washington, D.C. So furthermore, we break those zones into a north-south boundary. It's basically from Cape Shoal all the way down to Cascade Head, and Cascade Head to Florence. And then we have the 10 nautical mile break and then the 60 nautical mile break. So sometimes those conditions are different in some of those specific zones. Sometimes the weather conditions are the same. But this coastal waters forecast is produced at least 2 times a day, roughly 9 a.m. and, or I'm sorry, 3 a.m. and 3 p.m. And then it can be issued up to 4 times a day, basically 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. if conditions warrant. And they can also be amended at any time during the day, say, for instance, if conditions worsen than we were typically forecasting, or get better than we were typically forecasting, we call that an amendment. So they can be amended more times than that, but as a minimum, they're issued at least 2 times a day.
Turning your attention to the exhibit on the screen, is this an example of the kind of weather forecast provided by your office?
Yes, it is.
How is that weather information disseminated to the public?
It's disseminated by various means. We have a pretty robust communication network that we can get this information out. I'm going to start with inland. We have this NOAA weather wire is one mechanism that this gets disseminated to a variety of users. A family of services is another dissemination method. We can get that out to a lot of our media partners. We also broadcast information over NOAA weather radio. We have a pretty extensive network of NOAA weather radio transmitters, 10 of them in our area of responsibility. That information gets disseminated that way. We also have web delivery services. All this information gets posted to our web page. Users can come in and access that web page and pull it back any time of the day. And then for some of our warning services, we have types of subscription services to get warning information out. Some of those we provide that free to some public service agencies, but those are widely available. Some of them are for free and some of them are for small fees through commercial weather providers. I'm trying to think, let's see what else we have. That's ones that come off the top of my head right now. So.
Yes, sir. Can you expand just briefly about how the weather radio, like what frequencies those are transmitted, the information is transmitted?
Sure. The National Weather Service is licensed to broadcast weather information over NOAA Weather Radio at 7 frequencies. They start at 162.400 megahertz, and they increment every 0.25 megahertz up to 162.550 megahertz. So there's 7 bands: 162.4, 162.425, 162.450, etc., up to 162.550. And so that footprint of the weather radio broadcast is anywhere from 40 to 100 nautical mile range, depending on atmospheric conditions and whatnot. And our nearest weather radio transmitter to this location is right here in Newport. And we also have a transmitter at Florence. We actually broadcast out of Euclid Head.
Are you aware of any blind spots, sometimes referred to as skip, with respect to radio frequencies?
There are blind spots in our NOAA weather radio transmission coverage, usually blocked by terrain in a few locations. That's why we put in as many transmitters as we have to kind of minimize the blind spots. Our goal a few years ago was to make NOAA weather radio coverage available to about 95% of the populace. So, but there are a few blind spots, and it's typically blocked by terrain.
Thank you. To the best of your knowledge, were there any obstacles that were encountered to disseminating the specific forecasts for the time frame leading up to the 8th of January 2019? Asking specifically if you know of any outages for the website or if any of the radio broadcasting equipment was malfunctioning.
To my knowledge, everything was functioning properly.
Okay, moving a little bit into bar conditions. We heard earlier testimony regarding wave heights and breaking surf in the Yaquina Bay area. Are these extreme conditions unique to this area?
No. Every one of the river bars along the Oregon-Washington coast have similar type of conditions. Probably the most famous one is the Columbia River Bar, which we actually put out specific forecasts for the Columbia River Bar, and we put out what we call advisories for the Columbia River Bar when conditions reach a certain threshold. Like you want to go threshold if you want. But that's the only bar, if you will, that we produce that type of forecast for. But the other bars, the Tillamook Bay Bar, the Yaquina Bar, has very similar conditions. The volume of water coming out of the Columbia River Bar is much greater, so it probably have, in my opinion, worse conditions on the Columbia River Bar than these other bars, but not to say that these other bars don't have very serious breaking wave conditions.
To the best of your knowledge, are the bar and surf conditions experienced in the other areas of the United States, like California, similar, greater than, or less than the Pacific Northwest?
I believe the Humboldt Bay Bar is very similar. Grays Harbor Bar in Washington, Humboldt Bay Bar in off Eureka, California is very similar, probably very similar to the Yaquina Bar. Grays Harbor Bar in Western Washington is also very similar. But I would say the Columbia River Bar is certainly the worst on the West Coast. In fact, I've heard from my interaction with mariners it's one of the worst in the world. That's the Columbia River Bar. That's different than the Yaquina Bay Bar, but certainly serious and treacherous conditions certain times of the month and certain conditions on that bar as well.
What about other areas of the United States, for example, the southern coast or the east coast?
To my knowledge, they don't have the same type of conditions as bar conditions that we have here on the West Coast. Not nearly as serious as conditions.
To give us a scope of the potential dangers of the Pacific Northwest bar areas, can you describe the worst surf conditions you have prepared a forecast for in terms of wave heights and surf conditions?
I believe the worst wave heights that I've observed in my career here in the Pacific Northwest is, this is buoy reports, at over top of the open ocean is 48-foot seas. That happened in a big storm in December 2007. As far as bar conditions, I'm trying to relate back anecdotally a little bit, but we've certainly seen, this is the Columbia River bar, this is where we have observations for, we produce a forecast for, but certainly breaking waves on the order of 28 feet.
And you had noted the one in 2007 was the result of a particular storm. In general, are the storms, either the winter or the summer, the reason for these extreme wave heights?
It's a couple of things. Certainly the storms. Typically the worst conditions happen in the winter months when we get these strong low pressure systems move up along the Pacific Northwest coast. It also has to do with the volume of water coming out of the rivers, and it's also directly related to the ebb currents. So the ebb current is basically river to sea. A flood current is sea to river. So these standing waves certainly occur fairly frequently in the wintertime when we have a large storm and a strong ebb current. Creates, that's basically the scenario where it creates these treacherous bar conditions.
And in general, can you estimate the frequency of those winter storms?
Well, during the winter months, it depends a little bit, but I have seen in my career these storms as frequently as every 24 to 30 hours if you get into a really active weather pattern where the jet stream or the storm track is kind of right over our latitudes. I would say that's more the exception. I would say probably during the course of the winter we might see a storm system, frontal system, maybe 2 to 3 times a week.
And how long do those storms usually last? Is it a multi-day storm or does it go through quickly?
Yeah, usually the frontal system will move through a particular area, usually from west to east, or some type of south to north component, southwesterly to northeasterly component. Move across a particular area in a matter of hours, and a handful of hours, 6 to 8 hours, something like that, and they'll certainly move on. There are exceptions to that. Sometimes the frontal systems will stall, and that can certainly occur, and that happens a few times a year too.
Lieutenant Woods, please display Exhibit 58, page 3. Mr. Wild, for the benefit of the public, I am displaying a photo of NOAA buoy 46097 in detail. Please take a moment to familiarize yourself with this photo. Lieutenant Woods, if you would zoom in on the sensors on the buoy, please. Lieutenant Woods, please shift to the same exhibit, page 1. Mr. Wild, when our computer catches up to us, it's going to be the full normal page for this buoy, and it'll show you the predictions. And I'm going to ask you in more detail about what kind of information this collects. Well, while we have this photo, Mr. Wild, can you please talk about the type of sensors that these buoys have on board and how they communicate to your office?
Yeah, so, I'm certainly not familiar with every particular sensor on there, but they have a wind instrument on there. That's what those little propeller type things are, those anemometers. It records wind direction and wind speed. There's a primary and a backup for that. These buoys also measure wave heights, called significant wave height. So that's basically the average top third of the waves that it sees. There's instruments on there that measures water temperature and air temperature as well. I would say for meteorological forecasting, to produce our marine forecast, we are most interested in the sea conditions or the wave height and the wind information, as that's directly related to the types of marine forecasts we provide.
And how do these buoys communicate that information to your office?
So this These buoys is all done by satellite communications, and we have a national data buoy center, which is in Mississippi. I think it's Stennis Space Center in Mississippi. So that agency is responsible for the maintenance and all the buoys in both oceans. And then once that information gets to the National Data Buoy Center, it also is routed through our telecommunications gateway in Washington, D.C., the National Weather Service Telecommunications Gateway. And then it's transferred from there out to the various weather offices to include ours in Portland, Oregon.
So the next exhibit I was hoping would come up would lend us this information, but to your knowledge, are there multiple weather buoys off of the Oregon coast?
There are. There's at least 3. Well, I'm sorry, there's at least 3 in our area of responsibility. There's another one down south, just off of Cape Blanco as well.
Thank you. And to the best of your knowledge, were all the marine weather buoys functioning as designed leading up to the night of the 8th of January of 2019?
I know the 2 off of the Oregon, the Northwest Oregon coast, the buoy, what we call 46050, which is 20 miles off of the coast of Newport at Stone Mill Banks. That was operating properly. Buoy 29 off the Columbia River Bar was operating properly, to my knowledge. We have another one, Buoy 89, which is about 60 miles off the Tillamook coast, off the coast of Tillamook, was operating properly. I don't recall that Buoy 15 off of the Cape Blanco coast was operating properly. I'd have to go back and look at the history of that. I'm unfamiliar with it. I know it has had some a little bit of outages this winter, so I'm not positive about the operational capability of that one on January 8th.
Thank you. I'd like to shift to Exhibit 27, page 5. This, I will remind you if you need to use your laser pointer. This, for the benefit of the public, is National Weather Service Marine Forecast for coastal waters from Cascade Head to Florence, Oregon, from 10 nautical miles to 60 nautical miles, dated the 8th of January 2019. Would you take a moment to familiarize yourself with the bottom portion of this document?
I'm familiar with this.
Can you briefly explain what a small craft advisory is and how it impacts mariners?
Sure, we have different criteria for what we call our marine weather warnings and advisories. So the first level, that is what we call a small craft advisory. This can be for strong winds, or this can be for certain types of sea conditions, or in the case of the Columbia River, rough bar conditions. So for winds, a small craft advisory for winds in the Pacific Northwest, that threshold is 21 knots to 33 knots inclusive. And those could be sustained winds or frequent gusts. Also for small craft advisory for hazardous seas, or what we call small craft advisories for seas, the wave height is in excess 10 feet or greater. And for rough Columbia Bar, the small craft advisories are basically for wave heights 10 feet or greater, or can be 7 feet or greater if we have breakers on the bar. So that's kind of the thresholds for small craft advisories. So it can be winds, it can be seas. The wind threshold is 21 to 33 knots. Seas are greater than 10 feet. There's some exceptions on the Columbia River Bar, can go down as low as 7 breakers. And then the next level of our marine warnings are gale warnings. That's strictly wind. The threshold for there is winds of 34 to 47 knots, either sustained or frequent knots. And beyond that, we get into storm force warnings. That's basically 48 knots to 63 knots of wind.
Why does your organization break up those certain thresholds? Why those wave heights and why those winds? Yeah, this has been done for many, many years in our agency. It's basically probably been some work with working with the Coast Guard, working with the various fishermen's groups that when the sea conditions get to these thresholds, for instance, let's just take a small craft, and then it's a notification to people going out onto the waters or the coastal waters that you need to exercise some caution because we have some weather conditions that could create some potential problems if
for navigating safe operation of your boat. And certainly once you get into the gale warnings, storm warnings, those conditions just worsen.
Mr. Wild, would you take a moment to familiarize yourself with the verbiage on this forecast, beginning at the bottom, with the word tonight? I will ask Lieutenant Woods to advance the slide to slide 6 when you give him the signal, and allow you to read the rest of the forecast for Tuesday evening. Please let me know when you are finished familiarizing yourself with this section before I continue with questions.
Yes, I'm familiar with that. So this particular segment here is for our segment from Cascade Head to Florence, Oregon, from 10 nautical miles up to 60 nautical miles. So we call that our outer waters forecast.
Yes, sir. Please advance to slide 6. And for the benefit of the public, this is not a two-part message. It was just a continuation of the screen capture. So Mr. Wild is now reading the rest of the forecast from that evening. Does the Coast Guard or any other state or federal agency provide weather observations specific to bar conditions?
Yes, we rely pretty heavily upon the U.S. Coast Guard with our bar conditions. In fact, we've got a nice program we've generated that is available on our webpage that has the bar conditions for every bar in Washington and Oregon, as well as a little bit of camera imagery. So how I understand the process works is, let's just say the Coast Guard station goes out and transits a particular bar, let's call it the Quina Bar, or call it Columbia River Bar. They report to whatever those observations were. That information gets sent to us folks at the National Weather Service. We include that into a web page that we have, we call it I forget the exact name, I can point to you on our web page, but it has the actual bar conditions for all the river bars up and down the Oregon and Washington coast, as well as a little bit of camera imagery.
Yes, sir.
So yeah, we are in partnerships with the Coast Guard in getting that information. And quite honestly, that information is sent to us in our office, and quite honestly, we use that information in our marine weather forecasting, especially for the Columbia River Bar.
And I do have some questions at a later date with the exhibit to clarify a little bit more on that.
Okay. Can I make one clarification on this product? So I think maybe worth emphasizing here is our today and tonight periods are basically 6 a.m. to 6 p.m.
Thank you. With respect to the Coast Guard and other entities informing that information, how does your office ensure that these forecasts are accurate? As in, do you have a feedback mechanism if the Coast Guard supplies X amount of conditions, does some entity in your office go back and say, yes, these were actually the observed conditions, or it meets what our forecast tools? Is there any kind of feedback loop?
Or you're talking about the observations itself, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so we actually try to do verification of, say for instance, our forecast was, and we typically try to do these verifications for our warning thresholds, gale warnings, storm warnings, things of that nature. So, if our forecast was for gale conditions at 40 knots, and we go back through it, and the buoy data was only 30 knots, then that would be a miss on our part. To say 40 knots or 45 knots, then we would verify that as a good forecast. So that process does take place.
Excellent. Does the National Weather Service provide training to federal, state, or local organizations that provide bar condition reports to your office?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Does your office provide training to federal, state, or local organizations that provide bar report conditions to your office?
I would say maybe, well, the answer to that is a little bit of yes and no. I would say not directly. We do have a position in the National Weather Service called a Port Meteorological Officer. There's one in Seattle, one in the Oakland area. I think the one in Seattle is actually vacant right now, but they actually make visits to the Coast Guard stations throughout the year, provide some training, provide help with some of their instrumentations, things of that nature. So there's that type of training going on. Throughout the year, we attend meetings with various fishermen group and commercial operators. Sometimes visit the Coast Guard. So in those visits, we provide some training on our weather forecasting capability, what type of data is available to them, how do you get that information, those type of things. So I would say they're not regularly scheduled like every 3 months, but it's as meetings and situations arise or opportunities arise, we can go out and visit these locations. We do that, and it's usually taking advantage of all of us being in some type of meeting together. So I think a good example is twice a year we meet with the Columbia River Fishermen Association, Driving Association, as well as the towboat operators that operate the barges up and down the West Coast. Sometimes the Coast Guard is at those meetings. We make a teleconference capability for those. Those meetings are typically held in Astoria. We have teleconference capabilities for the fishermen group at Newport to participate in those. A lot of those meetings talk about regulatory type stuff. Let's try to keep the ground plots out of the tow lanes, things of that nature. But the National Weather Service usually gives some type of marine weather training and updates at those type of meetings. So that's an example of some of the types of training we do.
Referring to the exhibit that's displayed on the screen, can you talk to the accuracy of this forecast in terms of actual weather for the late afternoon leading into the late evening from the 8th of January 2019?
Yes, I think that was very accurate, actually. So in this particular case, you can kind of see we had small craft advisories out. This is for what we call the outer waters up until about 4 p.m. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit. We were expecting a storm system to come in that particular day on Tuesday night and Wednesday with rapidly deteriorating weather conditions. Sea conditions coming up quite rapidly and wind conditions increasing quite rapidly. And so we definitely had small craft winds all throughout the evening. It looks like we went to gale force winds about 4 o'clock the next morning near the exit site. And the seas really ramped up, well in excess of 10 feet, and they peaked out at about 17 feet, close to 17 feet at the time of the accident, and they actually maximized at about 20 feet about midnight that time. So I think that forecast was very accurate. Small craft advisories out until late afternoon, then we were transitioning to a gale warning, which is a higher threshold of basically higher winds and be more chaotic sea conditions. So I think this was a very accurate forecast.
Please display Exhibit 58, page 2. Mr. Wild, for the benefit of the public, I am displaying the Aquino Bay Bar camera image along with verbiage associated with the image. This image was displayed on the National Weather Service website. And while we're pulling that up, Mr. Wild, are you familiar with the term bar report?
Yes, I am.
Would you expand upon that?
So this is something we look very forward to in our office, as the Coast Guard in particular. We're really anxious to see the bar report coming out of Cape Disappointment, the Coast Guard station at Cape Disappointment, because we knew they just made a transit out across the Columbia River bar close to it and radioed back what basically the bar conditions were. So we kind of use that as our check, if you will, our verification of, hey, how's our forecast for the Columbia River bar going? And we basically move our forecast in one direction or the other based upon that bar report, so that's very critical. And like I said earlier, the Coast Guard provides those type of bar reports for the other bars too, and we integrate it into this particular web page. So we look at this several times a day to get an idea of what the particular conditions are up and down the river bars in our area of responsibility.
Thank you. I'll refer you specifically to the graphic. Do you see where it says status and restrictions?
Yes.
Would you please talk to the comments that are filling in status and restrictions?
Well, this is something the Coast Guard puts in. We're certainly more interested in the information below there about, hey, what are the sea conditions, what are the wave conditions in the actual bar, in the main channel of the bar, or next to the jetties. No restrictions, basically, to our knowledge, that means, no restrictions to any type of vessel. Sometimes we see restricted to some type of vessel, a certain length of vessel, I believe, and sometimes we see bar closure restrictions on there, which is all done by the U.S. Coast Guard. Again, we're most interested, the National Weather Service, we're most interested to see the sea conditions and any type of wind conditions we can get, especially in the main channel.
Looking at this page, this is obviously the web camera image, looking at the seaward entrance. Are you aware if this camera provides continuous video, allowing a viewer to see actual condition at the moment of viewing, or is there a periodic interval?
To my knowledge, the camera imagery is available during daylight hours. Certainly the imagery is available at night. There's no illumination or anything like that, so you're not going to see much at night. As long as the camera is operating. This camera is not operated by the National Weather Service, so we're at the mercy of whoever operates this camera. But yeah, to my knowledge, we can look in here any kind of given day, and it's usually up-to-date imagery. There has been occasions when the cameras has gone offline, or the information's gone offline, and it's usually the result of some type of data dissemination issue.
Are you aware of who maintains the imagery?
I believe, I couldn't say for sure. What else? I believe it's the Coast Guard, but I'm not completely sure.
Thank you. Switching briefly to the weather forecast, you earlier mentioned, how can anyone listen to the weather forecast, specifically asking about AM commercial radios, or do you need any special equipment to tune into and listen to those frequencies?
Okay, so if you want to listen to the weather forecast, the best vehicle for that is over NOAA weather radio. So you would need a receiver, we call them weather radio receivers, something to be able to pick up in those frequencies I mentioned. So you can get your information over NOAA weather radio that particular way. Some automobiles also can pick up that frequency. There's only two that I know of, but and also I think we relay this information to the U.S. Coast Guard. Our weather forecast. To my knowledge, they have the capability to relay that information over their frequencies too, on some type of recording, or even a phone recording too. And that's another way we can get the information in our office too. I failed to mention before, but you can also dial into some type of telephone number, a phone tree, and also get this weather information via telephone. So if you want to listen to it, I think the short answer is no weather radio, or some type of weather radio receiver, phone, by calling the number at our office, or maybe listening to a broadcast out of the Coast Guard station, which would contain the latest weather information and any warnings or advisories that are in effect.
How is the public made aware of the various ways to listen to the marine forecast?
Through various education efforts, all that is available through our web delivery services, but it's also part of our outreach and education efforts of multiple ways you can kind of receive weather information, and we do public education. We take advantage of doing this type of education almost every type of meeting we have with some type of customer group, or even the public, attending public meetings, and take advantage of trying to relay this type of information, this type of education.
Lieutenant Woods, please display Exhibit 18, page 2. You can obey bar restrictions. Mr. Wild, I am displaying a compilation of these bar reports we talked about earlier from the day of the 8th of January, 2019. When it comes up, I will ask you to identify the line beginning at timestamp 1644.
Okay, could you zoom in, please?
It should be at the top entry of the page.
for the benefit of the public, we're having some technical difficulties with our computers, so we're going to run the paper copy to Mr. Watt.
Okay. I think I can see here now. Yeah, got it.
Okay. Mr. Wild, can you please familiarize yourself with the verbiage next to the timestamp 1644? And when you're ready, would you please read aloud from that timestamp?
Okay, so on the left-hand side, the timestamp 1/8/2/19 at 1644 on the left of there, it says all recreational / UPV. So to my understanding, this is some U.S. Coast Guard language. That's basically, there's, I don't know if this is a restriction. Let me read the right-hand side here a little bit. Yeah, so it'd be restricted to recreational and uninspected commercial passenger vessels, I'm sorry. So again, a restriction by the U.S. Coast Guard to all recreational and uninspected commercial passenger vehicles, in this case at Buoy 7. So, and there's some information on what the sea conditions are, the jetty tips, and also what the main channel is. So 4 to 6 foot long ocean swells, winds east of 10 to 15 knots. There's some level of restriction there on that particular entry.
What information might a mariner glean from that information?
Well, there would be really great information to have here about, on this particular, I think this is for the Equina bar, in this particular case. So it would be, what are the sea conditions expected in the main channel? That would be, in this particular case, 4 to 6 foot long ocean swells. What the sea conditions are, the jetty tips. There's some chop due to the ebb. And what the visibility would be, 5 nautical miles. And then certainly, if you want to call this a notice to mariner, if there is a restriction on this particular bar at this point in time.
What is the significance of the predicted tides and the tidal currents, and how do those tides affect the conditions specifically in Newport Bay?
Okay, so, certainly, certainly we were having some, if I recall correctly, we were having some pretty higher tides that particular time of the month, because we just had a new moon 2 days before, so that's typically the time of your high tides. And then what's not available here, I don't see anyway, is the current velocity. So if there was an ebb current, and you can go look and see what the current velocity was. If there was an ebb current, that would be, if you were transiting at the time of the ebb current, that's some of your worst sea conditions that can occur as the ebb current kind of goes out and you're met with, the ocean waves, the swell coming in from the open ocean is going to basically create some type of standing wave across these bars.
And you mentioned earlier that the verbiage reads, the bar is currently restricted to all recreational and uninspected commercial passenger vessels at Buoy 7. Do you know who is responsible for restricting the bar and closing the bar?
Yes, to my knowledge, that's done by the U.S. Coast Guard.
And do you know what parameters they base those restrictions or closures on?
I do not.
Lieutenant Woods, please display this exhibit, page 1. Mr. Wild, I'd like to direct your attention toward the timestamp entry 2058. And I'd like you to read the section that talks about, starts at jetty tips and goes through Buoy 7, please.
I think just scroll past.
Negative. Go down. It's
2058?
Yes, please.
Okay, so the entry there is, this is, basically some entry for the jetty tips and main channel, 12 to 14 foot swells with occasionally 16 foot breaks, so the waves are breaking. Visibility is 6 nautical miles. The winds are out of the east-southeast at 10 to 13 knots. And the bar is currently restricted to recreational and uninspected commercial passenger vessels at Buoy number 7. So that tells me, from our previous entry, the sea conditions are worsening. Certainly, as we had in our forecast, the the seas are rising, and the winds is also kind of picking up. So that tells me that the weather conditions are deteriorating, weather and sea conditions.
Although the forecast is for 12 to 14 foot waves with occasional 16, could the actual conditions on sea exceed 14 to 16 foot waves?
Well, this, to my knowledge, this is not a forecast, this is an observation.
That's right.
In this particular case, so there's a little bit of a distinction there. But yes, right now at the latest observation, and typically these are, to my knowledge, these are made by U.S. Coast Guard personnel going out and making some type of transit out there, making their best judgment on what these conditions are. And so could the conditions be worse? I think that's certainly possible, given the nature of the weather that was occurring that night. Approaching funnel system, waves are going to come up, the winds are going to increase. So these conditions could certainly possibly be worse, if not at this point in time, shortly thereafter.
Why is there no update on this restriction after the timestamp 2058 until the next morning at 07:57 on the 9th of January?
I'm not probably the right person to answer that question, but to my knowledge, working with our Coast Guard partners, these observations are again done by U.S. Coast Guard personnel actually making a transit out either across or near the bar in putting this type of information, this type of observation available into this mechanism. We can kind of post this on our webpage.
Lieutenant Woods, please display Exhibit 49, page 4. Mr. Wild, this will be a graphic representing the moonrise and moonset data for the evening of the 8th of January 2019. On the evening of the 8th of January 2019, the moon was waxing crescent and represented 6% illumination. Given this information, can you explain how this amount of moonlight might illuminate this area at night?
Well, it looks like from here, we certainly had a new moon on January 6th, so that's basically the moon is not visible. So by the 8th, the moon is starting to wax, so we basically have just a little bit of a crescent shine. So I think there would be virtually no lunar illumination out on the water at that particular night. That little sliver of crescent might give it a little bit, but little to no illumination from that much moonlight.
With the absence of any other lighting in the area, would this amount of moonlight be enough to illuminate objects in the water such as jetties or waves?
I could not answer that quite honestly.
So in closing, I'd like to ask, give you the opportunity to share any insight you might have on this incident or offer any other suggestions in improving weather forecasting, and whether there is any technology that you're aware of under development that can be used to enhance the forecast of dangerous conditions.
Well, first of all, I would think part of our organization, our hearts and prayers go out to the victims of this accident. Certainly a tragic accident, and we're totally sorry for any type of loss of life that occurs in this environment. As far as improvements, the National Weather Service is constantly trying to improve our capabilities through improved new and improved or more observational networks, through our modeling efforts. We certainly have an effort underway now to kind of, if you want to call it modernize or use state-of-the-art wave prediction models. That work is underway, and we are very optimistic about seeing very fruitful outcome of that information to help us improve our capability to continue to improve our weather forecast and our marine weather forecast. So I think there's good hope on the horizon with these efforts.
Thank you. Does any other member of the investigation panel have any questions? Mr. Ryan?
No questions. Thank you very much.
You are now released as a witness from this formal hearing. Thank you for your testimony and cooperation. If I later determine that this board needs additional information from you, I will contact you through your agency. If you have any questions about this investigation, you may contact our investigation reporter, Lieutenant Newport. Thank you. For the record, it is 1:50 p.m. We'll go ahead and take a 10-minute break. So we will reconvene at 2 p.m. Thank you. and reconvene the hearing. We'll now hear testimony from Commander Harris, from Brandon Harris from District 13 Waterways Management. Mr. Harris, Commander Harris is already at the witness table, so Lieutenant Woods, please administer the oath and ask preliminary questions.
Commander Harris, a false statement given to an agency of the United States is punishable by fine and/or imprisonment under 1001 and may also subject you to discipline under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Knowing this, do you solemnly swear that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please proceed, sir.
Commander Harris, you have Coast Guard Counsel with you.
Right.
Commander Lee, can you please, for the record, introduce yourself?
Yes, ma'am. My name is Lieutenant Commander Jim Lee. I'm a detailed staff attorney for the PAC Area Legal Committee.
Thank you. All of my questions are related to the time frame prior to the loss of the crew and the fishing vessel Mary B2 Best Chat, unless otherwise noted. Commander, we're gonna discuss these broad topic areas for today's testimony. The roles and responsibilities of the Waterways Management Division at District 13, status of aids navigation in Yaquina Bay and discussion on tools to evaluate effectiveness of those aids navigation, and ways in which the Coast Guard provides tools for mariners on the Yaquina Bay Bar and in Newport Harbor with a focus on the approach. So Commander, good afternoon, and thank you for appearing today at this hearing. You have provided this investigation team a presentation to assist you with your testimony, and it has been marked as Coast Guard Exhibit 052. We've also sent you relevant exhibits to examine beforehand so that you could effectively answer our questions. The discussion on some waterways functions, such as regulated navigation areas, will be discussed later in the week. Even though this questioning is related to the Mary B2 casualty, unless I state otherwise, it's for all vessels that come in and out of the Yaquina Bay waterway. In the public interest, please minimize any use of acronyms during the testimony.
That's right.
If you need to take a break at any time, please let me know. And at this point, I'd like to follow up on some of the questions that Lieutenant Woods asked you at the beginning of your appearance. How many years have you been assigned to waterways and aids navigation related assignments?
6 years.
And what were those?
I was the executive officer on a heavy lift ocean going buoy tender in Hawaii for 2 years. And then I was the commanding officer on that ship for 2 years and a follow-on year in Charleston, South Carolina. So another heavy lift buoy tender, and I spent the waterways office.
Okay, can you explain, please, the role and responsibilities of the Waterways Management Division at District? And Lieutenant Woods, if you could please pull up Exhibit 052. You can use that to assist in that discussion. I may ask you questions during the presentation and or wait until after you finish presenting.
Okay, sounds good. So, as stated, I'm Commander Vernon Harris, the Waterways Management Branch Chief at District 13. I am in charge of a staff of 13 Coast Guard members, 7 civilians, 6 active duty, who manage the waterways throughout District 13, which includes Montana, Idaho, Washington, and Oregon. There are 23 federally navigated waterways in that region with approximately 1,800 aids to navigation and 700 bridges that go over the waterways that we are responsible to manage. We also oversee the operations of 7 Coast Guard units, 4 aids to navigation teams on Kennewick, Puget Sound, Coos Bay, and Astoria, as well as 3 cutters, Bluebell out of Portland, the cutter Elm out of Astoria, and the cutter Henry Blake out of Everett, Washington. Next slide, please. So the Waterways mission is to ensure that we are analyzing and responding as appropriate to all applicable waterways so that they are navigable for both recreational and commercial users, to utilize the resources that we have at our disposal to maintain the aids to navigation, as well as bridge permitting processes throughout the district. Next slide, please. We are tasked by this through the Code of Federal Regulations, Chapter 33, Section 62, which tasks us to maintain federal aids to navigation as well as private aids to navigation and aids to navigation that are maintained by other organizations. And it's our responsibility to ensure that the aid availability rate, which is how often an aid is on station, a certain percentage of the time, that meets federally mandated levels. And if not, we got to determine what is causing that and how to better utilize our resources to do that. And also, we are tasked to analyze the waterways on a regular basis, receive feedback from the mariners to determine if there need to be any adjustments, whether that's caused by the environment, a shift in the waterway, or a determination that the current aids to navigation system is not adequate. Next slide, please. This is a quick look at the entrance channel to Uquina. And so the green circles on the slide show where the maintained aids to navigations are. So those are the federally maintained aids to navigations. If you're working out to in, you have the Uquina Bay Approach Buoy Y, which is our safe water mark, which is visible for the mariners to give them an idea of where they are in the water, and that they can go to that and they'll have safe water around them before they make their transit either in or out, or as they're going up the coast. We also have Uquina Bay Entrance Buoy 1, and the way we set up our aids to navigation is so that they should be visible from the previous aid behind it. So to make a determination this far out on the waterway, we want to place an aid to navigation so that the mariners know where they should start their transit inbound, and then we want the next aid to navigation visible to them from their perspective on the water to ensure that they can see where they're supposed to be transiting to maintain safe passage. The next buoy is Uquina Bay Entrance Buoy 3. This is a seasonal aid to navigation. So this aid to navigation is supposed to be on station from the 1st of May every year through the 1st of October. And it's maintained by the Coast Guard Cutter Elm out of Astoria. And so right now this aid should be on station. The next aid to navigation on the chart is Uquina Bay South Jetty Light 4, which is about 200 yards off the tip of the South Jetty, and it is currently watching properly, and there's also a sound signal at the end of the jetty to ensure the mariners in low visibility conditions where they can't see that far off of their bow can be aware of where they are navigationally. That's the sound signal. Yes, ma'am?
Can you use your laser pointer that should be on the table to point that out?
Okay, so
if you could point to buoy, the YB buoy, the entrance buoy, and then very quickly and just go through them and then
out here at the very edge of the corner of the chart, the entrance buoy 1 is moving eastbound towards the channel. Entrance buoy 3 is off of the north jetty. Your light signal, the jetty light 4, is here 200 yards from the tip of the south jetty. And there is a fog signal, a sound signal right here that is also a seasonal aid to navigation. So that is established from 1 May to 1 October as well, and sounds for 2 seconds every 15 seconds continuously to ensure that the mariners are aware in conditions of low visibility. You then have lighted buoy 7 up here within the jetties. And then there is a range. So a range is designed for the mariners to have a line to track on as they're navigating inbound on a transit to know how far left or right of the preferred track that they are on. So this should have been visible to any mariners in or outbound into Waterway. Next slide, please. So this slide depicts the condition of the aids to navigation as of 08 January. So as you can see, the red star here on the Y buoy depicts that that buoy was actually missing. So the buoy went missing as of December 12th, and it was broadcast through broadcast notice to mariners to ensure that all mariners were aware of its absence from the region. There is an automatic identification system, electronic navigation aid on that spot as well. So if the vessels transiting in and out have what we call AIS capability, they would still look at their chart and have that electronic aid depicted on their chart at all times. The next buoy, entrance buoy 1, was on station and watching properly. The entrance buoy number 3, while it was seasonally disestablished, it did sink on station on the 14th of August. It was reported missing, and NOAA actually did soundings of the region, and they came back with a very clear picture of the buoy sitting on the bottom of the channel. So that buoy is currently sunk on station right in that spot. The light 4, jetty light 4, was found to be watching properly, and as well as buoy 7 and the fore and aft range boards and lights for the entrance transit. And that completes the prepared presentation, ma'am.
So I do have some questions about that slide.
Okay.
So backing it up a step or two, does your division maintain historical records for each aid to navigation?
Yes, ma'am. We have what we call an aid to navigation folder for each aid that we maintain.
Can you please describe what I would find in an aid to navigation folder?
So it's going to have the complete history of all administrative actions on that aid to navigation. It's going to include, should be pictures from each time it was serviced by a unit. It should talk to the reason for establishment of that aid to navigation and include every time it was serviced in its life. It should include message traffic on any time a discrepancy or anything else associated. So such as an accident occurs, we're required to do an aid to navigation verification in and around the area of the accident. So if that occurred around an aid to navigation, that record should be included in the historical perspective to draw back on.
So was the status of the aids to navigation in this waterway in compliance with Coast Guard policies and directives?
It was in compliance. The fact that we had discrepant aids, throughout the district. We utilize our resources as best we can to ensure that we get those corrected as quickly as we can. The stated aid availability rate that we're seeking to achieve is 97.5% of the time. That we want an aid to be minimal. The minimum statuses for the characteristics to be watching properly at all times. So yes, they were in compliance with federal standards.
Okay, thank you. So I think I need some clarification on the status of buoy number 3. And on this slide, it has it as seasonally decommissioned. You mentioned that it's an aid to navigation that is commissioned 1 May and decommissioned in the winter.
1 October, yes.
1 October. And you also mentioned that that it was reported missing, and that I believe you said November was when it was found.
Yes, so the NOAA vessel was able to do sounding in November, yes.
So if the, I'd like to, Lieutenant Woods, could you please pull up Coast Guard Exhibit 061? So if you could please go to page 2. These are Coast Guard messages with respect to what Commander Harris was talking about. If you could just zoom in, please, on the, and scroll down. And then paragraph 41. For the benefit of the public, this is the message communication that Commander Harris was talking about. Commander, is this the message traffic that reported?
Yes, ma'am. This message was sent out by the Cutter Fur to document the update from the NOAA missile.
Lieutenant, would you please scroll down to page 1, or I'm sorry, scroll up to page 1. Zoom in, please. Okay, so this is, what is this message?
So this message states that NOAA scanned the ocean floor and that they found the mooring. So a configuration for a floating aid to navigation is a mooring, which is usually a heavy concrete sinker. So in this case, a 36,000-pound sinker on the ocean floor that keeps the aid to navigation in place. Attached to the sinker is a chain. So in this case, we had 180 feet of 1.7 diameter steel chain attached from the mooring to the buoy, which was an 8-foot diameter by 26-foot in length aid to navigation. So the NOAA scan showed very clearly, you can see the mooring, that 36,000-pound concrete sinker sitting on the ocean floor with the buoy off to the west laying on its side.
Thank you very much. So for clarification, if it's still there, is the phrasing seasonally decommissioned? Because is it seasonally decommissioned?
So it would have been decommissioned as of 1 October, so it's no longer a discrepant aid to navigation since we didn't expect it to be on scene and watching properly at that time.
So is there a reason that it is a seasonal aid?
Yes. So the history of this aid going back to 1963 is that it is very difficult to keep it on station during the winter months. So the wave action in that area is extremely strong, and it causes the aid to go either off station, missing, or sink rather regularly. So we've determined that we don't have the resources to maintain that aid to navigation from the October 1st to May 1st timeframe.
I understand. Does the Coast Guard have a buoy model, or has the Coast Guard, to your knowledge, contemplated other designs for a buoy that might hold up better in an environment with strong current and large seas similar to the Quinnipiac Bar?
So there are fast water buoys, but they are smaller size buoys. So the characteristic of a buoy that you're putting out in the ocean in that spot needs to be a certain size in order for the mariners to be able to see it. If it's not a certain size, and with the size of the swell that goes through the area, it's more hazard to navigation than it is an aid to navigation. So it would be a detriment to the mariners actually trying to transit the area. So most of the fast water buoys are a smaller size that we really couldn't use at this location. We do have some, what they are called ice buoys, which have a different configuration on the bottom. So we've had some discussions on whether or not it would be an option to put on there. So that's something we could potentially look at. I haven't heard of ice buoys being used in an offshore environment and heard whether or not that was an adequate response or an adequate aid to navigation. So that's something we're considering right now, but I don't believe at this point it's been tried within the organization.
Thank you. Do you know if other waterways in this Coast Guard district have a similar problem with their aids to navigation?
Yes, we have other aids that are on bars that are seasonal, especially a lot of the jetty lights, like the sound signal on the jetty is also seasonal for Uquinnet. So the wave action over those jetties is also extremely strong and knocks down our lights and our sound signals rather frequently. So we've done the risk analysis and resource analysis to determine how and when we can maintain those aids.
By that standard, then, is buoy 3 less important or more important, or the same level of importance than the Yaquina Bay entrance buoy? YB buoy, I think it's called sometimes.
Yes, ma'am. I would say they're the same level of importance, but just the specific location of the 3 buoy being directly on that bar, the weight of action there is considerably greater than what you have at the Y buoy. So it makes it that much more difficult to maintain. And we did attempt, so from 1964 to 1973, it was a continuous year-round buoy. There were 19 discrepancies on it over a 9-year period, which is a significant number. So for our buoys, we usually service them on either 12, 24, or 36-month basis. So our expectation is that at the very least, we'll be able to leave a buoy alone for a year, a calendar year, and it should be able to maintain safety. So in the event that that is increased threefold on what we would normally see, that becomes a resource constraint that we don't have adequate capability of maintaining. So we did try in 1994. It was attempted to make it a continuous buoy as well. It went discrepant twice within a 6-month period, and they quickly made it a seasonal buoy once again. And in 2006, they tried once more with a slightly different configuration, and we got new advanced lighting systems that we were able to put on buoys. So the hope was that that might solve some of those issues, but it then went discrepant 3 times in a 9-month period. So we quickly put it back to seasonal.
Okay, so I'm going to shift gears a little bit to the entrance buoy, the YB buoy. And can we, Lieutenant Woods, please put up 052 again, slide 5. So while that's coming back up, you mentioned that that buoy's missing. How long has that buoy been missing?
So we got the report that the YB buoy went missing on December 12th.
December 12th of 2018.
2018, yes.
Gotcha. So are there Coast Guard policies about how quickly an aid to navigation has to be reestablished for buoys similar to the YB buoy?
So each buoy is giving an aid criticality 1, 2, or 3. And that criticality then gives you a certain response time to take action. And that action doesn't necessarily mean that you're correcting the discrepancy. It means whether you go on scene and verify or you make a determination of how long it's going to be before you're able to act on it, because there's other constraints that might keep you from correcting the discrepancy. So for the YB buoy, that discrepancy response time should have been 24 hours. We should have had a message out about the status and our plan for that buoy within 24 hours.
Okay. And did the Coast Guard do that?
Yes, we did, ma'am.
And what was the plan of action?
So right now we are in a difficult spot when it comes to heavy lift, ocean-going sea buoy tenders. So the vessels that are capable of servicing that aids to navigation, the Coast Guard fleet of 225-foot buoy tenders, is going through a midlife maintenance. So District 13 has one 225-foot buoy tender, the Coast Guard Cutter Elm, stationed in Astoria. She is currently in Baltimore, Maryland, getting refurbished and has been there for 16 months now. So we have been without that heavy lift capability for almost a year at this point. So we don't have an asset that is capable of dragging for and recovering the aid that is on the ocean floor or reestablishing a new aid in that position. We did put out a request to our command, so Pacific area, Coast Guard Pacific area. We requested if there were any other heavy lift buoy tenders in the region or in the Coast Guard that could come and support us in that mission, and we got a negative response because District 17 in Alaska is also having resource struggles, as well as District 11 in California. Their buoy tender was going in for a dry dock availability shortly after we put out that request. So the buoy went discrepant on December 12th, and we put out the message requesting support on December 14th. And at this point, the response is no support available. So our plan is to wait until the cutter helm comes back, but we're going to continue checking in with Pacific area to determine if there is a resource availability at any point to rectify that situation.
Thank you very much. Earlier in your presentation, you mentioned AIS. Can you very briefly explain that and what that means with respect to Yaquina Bay? You mentioned that the YB buoy has a virtual aid, so could you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so the automatic identification system is initially established for vessel tracking. So a lot of your larger vessels will have an AIS transmitter that puts out their position so that other vessel traffic is aware and they can arrange passing arrangements and avoid maritime incidents. So the Coast Guard has translated that into our ACE navigation system using the same technology. And there's a transmitter at Station Yaquina Bay that transmits the position of certain aids to navigation. So that transmitter is limited to, I believe, pushing out 4 signals. So we have an AIS signal on the Y buoy, and I believe there's one on the ranges as well. So those electronic aids to navigation are designed to show up on the mariner's chart. So even in the event that aid to navigation might not be on scene, or we can make a determination such as for the 3 buoy, maybe it is a seasonal aid and that we can't maintain the on-station buoy hole there year-round, we can keep an AIS signal on that location year-round to better utilize our resources and give the mariners a better picture to navigate off of.
Commander, are all vessels that come in and out of Yaquina Bay furnished with the equipment necessary to receive or read AIS information, to your knowledge?
No. So from my understanding, vessels 65 feet and greater in length are required to carry AIS. Vessels less than 65 feet can choose to if they want to carry that.
So if a vessel doesn't have AIS, how can a mariner know about those buoys?
So the broadcast notice to mariners is a transmission that is sent out. So when the Y buoy went discrepant or was no longer on station, the Coast Guard broadcast a message letting mariners know, so they can listen on VHF channel 16, and they'll be made aware of the current status in that harbor. That could be a hazard to navigation, a change in the status of an aid to navigation. It could be a log floating down the river. So we have that immediate response. And we also have the local notice to mariners, which is released weekly on Wednesdays through a PDF on the Coast Guard's Navigation Center website that has your full rundown of all aid status for District 13. So we are dependent on mariners being aware of where the resources are for them to ensure awareness of the current status, and that they check regularly for updates.
Okay. Shifting your attention to lighted beacon number 4, can you speak in depth about this aid to navigation, specifically what color lights, height, the range, the charted range of visibility?
Sure. So lighted aid 4 is, all of this is available in the light list, which is maintained by the Navigation Center. So lighted let's see. South Jetty Light 4 is 17 feet tall. It's a flashing red light every 2.5 seconds. And the range is supposed to be visible for a range of 4 miles.
Is red like the standard color for ranges?
For range, so red is the standard color for aids to navigation on the right-hand side of an inbound traffic lane. So you'll find when you're navigating that green is going to be on your left-hand side inbound, and red is going to be on your right-hand side. Ranges are oftentimes white to differentiate between your left and right or port and starboard.
Okay, I understand. So, on the chart, there does not appear to be a light number 4 on the North Jetty. In the past, has the Coast Guard ever maintained a light in that position?
Yeah, so we have 13 jetties up and down the Pacific Northwest and Washington and Oregon. Of those 13, 9 are lit jetties, and all 9 only have 1 jetty lit. In the past, the light for Yaquina Bay was on the North Jetty until 1979. In 1979, the aid was destroyed by a strong storm that came through, both the actual aid and the concrete base that the aid was placed on. And it was determined at that time that the jetty was in such a state that we could not rebuild the light on the North Jetty. So we chose to shift it to the south. So since 1981, the light has been on the South Jetty. And even if we wanted to put one on the North Jetty right now, it's been determined that the jetty is in state of disrepair that wouldn't allow for us to be able to maintain it.
So it's not feasible at this time for the Coast Guard to reestablish that light?
Yes, ma'am.
It's not stable. And that came from what agency?
So the agency that's responsible for maintaining the jetties is the Army Corps of Engineers. So the Coast Guard makes a determination on whether or not we can build and maintain a structure on them in coordination with the Army Corps, but the Army Corps is the agency that's actually responsible for maintaining the jetties and the state that they're in.
Thank you. So you mentioned the range lights, and we've talked a little bit about the ranges. There's a forward and a rear range light, and you mentioned in your presentation that those were used for the mariner to navigate in. So you mentioned that the standard color for range lights is white. What is the color for Yaquina Bay's ranges?
So Yaquina Bay's ranges are, the rear range is red, and the front range is also red. So it might be dependent on what are the background colors in a specific harbor. So if you're choosing something other than white, you're going to make a determination based on the total setup of that waterway. So if we had made it a white range, is it just going to blend into the background and not be visible to the mariners? I'm not fully aware of the decision that went into choosing the colors for the entrance range in Yaquina, but we want to ensure that the lights differentiate themselves from the background lights so that they're clearly visible to the mariners as they navigate the waterway.
Okay. Can you see the color red as far as you can see the color white when it comes to aids to navigation?
So we do a calculation. I'm not sure. So the lights that we have, we can set the luminosity on them, the strength of that signal. I don't know if it varies by color, but we do a calculation for every aid and for every light that we display to say what range should this light be visible out to. So I don't know if white or red would make a difference. I'd have to go back and check on that if that's part of our calculation in it or not. But we set the luminosity on that light to meet a certain requirement where we've determined we want the mariner to be able to see this aid to navigation out to this range.
Okay. Commander, we've talked approach to entering the waterway. You also mentioned in your presentation that that Waterways Management regularly assesses the waterway. When's the last time that this waterways aids navigation configuration was evaluated?
So the official report that we use is called a WAMS, a Waterways Assessment. So the last official WAMS completed on Uquina was 1996. So it's been a while since an official one has been done. And the organizational policy is that we try to get a WAMS done every 5 years on each waterway. So we are extremely delinquent in getting Uquina done, and it's something that's on our to-do list. The way we have managed it with the resource constraints that we have is we maintain a very close relationship with the waterways users, with the Coast Guard units that are in regions, and with the harbor safety committees that work to support the mariners in their areas to ensure that we stay linked in, and hopefully we're hearing about issues within a waterway outside of doing an official WAMS process, that we can be very responsive, and we have something called a mini WAMS that we can do, which is concentrated on a specific area. So we're not going to look at the whole waterway and do a more extensive review of the waterway, but if they let us know that there's an aid or two or a specific region in the waterway that they have concerns over, we'll come in and analyze it in a more abbreviated manner, and we can adjust accordingly. So we did one of those in 2006. That's when they changed the 3-buoy to a year-round aid. That was based off a mariner request to have a year-round aid. So we made that attempt. We made changes to the aid to try to get it to stay on station. And then after a trial period, it was determined that we weren't going to be able to make it work, so we had to shift it back. So to answer your question, the waterways assessments are supposed to be every 5 years. Uquina's last official full waterways assessment was 1996.
Okay. Commander Harris, please explain how channel depth is maintained for a channel like Uquina Bay, and more specifically also how that topic as far as the Coast Guard interaction between the agency that maintains channel depth.
Yes, ma'am. So the channels are, in the dredging of the channels to maintain their current depth is managed by the Army Corps of Engineers along with the jetties. And the Army Corps regularly does soundings of the channels to verify what the current depth is, and then they utilize those soundings to determine if they are going to, whether it's they have their own vessels that have dredging capabilities, whether they can get those vessels on scene to manage the dredging, or whether they have to contract out for commercial support to complete that dredging. So Uquina Bay has advertised controlling depths for the different regions of the waterway, and the Army Corps is responsible to conduct soundings to verify whether the waterway actually meets those depths. And then in the event that they don't meet the controlling depths throughout the channel, it's their responsibility to get a dredge on scene and dredge to the advertised controlling depth.
Lieutenant Woods, can you please bring up Coast Guard Exhibit 028? It's an Army Corps of Engineering depth chart. So for the benefit of the public, this is what one product looks like that we get from the Army Corps of Engineers. Could we zoom in, please, on the entrance of the Uquina Bay? Little more zoom. So if there's a problem with the channel with respect to shoaling, how would the Coast Guard learn about it, and what would the Coast Guard do?
We can learn about it in several different ways. First off, if there are groundings in an area. So if vessels are grounding in spots that are supposed to be at greater depth than what they actually have, the Army Corps of Engineers will let us know if during their sounding process they determine that the depths in the channel have decreased. It's their responsibility to contact us as the Coast Guard to update charts, or actually NOAA is the one who updates the charts, but they contact us as the managers of the waterways, and they're also responsible to work with the local waterways users to keep them aware of what the current depths are so that they can manage their vessel traffic. So in this instance, when you see that their controlling depth in some spots is up to 8 feet shallower than what it's supposed to be, that'll impact the mariners of deep draft vessels, their ability to get in and out, and they're going to have to time their transit based on the tides and currents to effectively manage that scenario, or it might make it so that certain classes of vessels can't transit the area because the controlling depth isn't met.
How frequently does your office talk to the Army Corps of Engineers with respect to dredging, and more specifically to dredging in the Uquinna Bay Bar, or the Uquinna Bay Waterway?
We have an annual meeting that takes place each winter, our focus for those meetings is impact to Coast Guard assets and the Coast Guard's ability to execute our missions of search and rescue and inspection. So can the station vessels get out, and do they need, if their location falls within a federally managed waterway, does it need to be sounded and dredged by the Army Corps? So we do that every year in the January, February timeframe, and that's throughout Washington and Oregon. We don't prioritize which waterways we want them to work on, but we give them the list and we give them the verbiage on why it's important that certain dredge work gets done in certain areas. So our focus is on Coast Guard response capabilities, and the Army Corps coordinates with the local waterways users and commercial waterways users to talk about impacts and talk about where they can utilize their resources effectively to support the mariners.
Okay, Commander, does the Army Corps of Engineers dredge or assess the depth or condition of waters outside the navigable channel? For example, the beach just north of the North Jetty.
I'm not aware. I'd have to go back and ask them. So they are required to maintain the federal navigable channel, which is highlighted by lines on the chart. I'm not sure if they utilize their resources to sound additional areas or not.
Sir, do you know who conducts periodic soundings of the water depth in those areas?
I am not.
Lieutenant Woods, please post Coast Guard Exhibit 004 and zoom in on the North Beach and jetty tip. Really close. And Commander, for your visibility, I think you have a binder, an exhibit binder.
Yes,
You
ma'am.
can turn to that, 004.
There's a report.
So are wrecks and hazards a function of waterways management?
To ensure that they are charted appropriately, yes. So we maintain awareness, or we have awareness of wrecks in the area, and we ensure that NOAA is informed so that then they can update a chart.
So stepping back a second, can you just explain for the benefit of the public what wrecks and hazards can be? What are some examples?
So a wreck Could be any time a vessel has sunk in an area and they've been unable to recover that vessel. And a hazard could be anything from a rock to any permanent geography in the area that could impact transit of a vessel.
Is the Coast Guard responsible for locating and marking the wreckage of any wreck?
We're responsible for distributing visibility on that, but not necessarily for locating. And if it's a wreck that impacts a navigable waterway, then yes, we would ensure that it was marked appropriately to ensure visibility for the mariners to give that area a wide berth and navigate safely.
If a vessel sinks, whose responsibility is it to find the vessel after the sinking?
I think it's got to be a coordinated. I'm not specifically sure. I know that for a previous fishing vessel that sunk, NOAA utilized their vessels to help locate that asset. But it's, and beyond that, I don't know, man.
Do you know, as a side note, has the Coast Guard attempted to locate or mark the remains of the Mary B2? Or has the wreckage of the Mary B2 been located?
From what I've heard, the wreckage was located and removed.
Do you have any details with respect to that? Are you speaking of the debris that washed up on the beach or any other component?
Yeah, just the debris that was washed up on the beach. I haven't heard anything beyond that, ma'am. But I have not heard of any other hazards to navigation related to the Mary B2 that impact the waterway.
And again, wrecks and hazards communicated to mariners.
So we would do a broadcast notice to mariners that would can be accessed either online or through Marine Broadcast on Channel 16. And then once the broadcast notice to mariners is canceled, we would highlight it in the local notice to mariners where the NOAA charting service can pull that information and add it to a chart.
Based on this casualty, has the Coast Guard conducted an analysis of this waterway?
We have not yet. We have one scheduled to commence the 1st of August.
Is there a requirement after an accident or casualty, like a Coast Guard policy, about evaluating the effectiveness of the aids to navigation in a waterway after an accident occurs?
There is not policy. There's the 5-year policy to analyze. There is policy that we need to verify the aids to navigation in the area to make a determination on whether that was a contributing factor to the incident.
At this time, I have no further questions. Do any members of the investigation panel have a question? Lieutenant Guy.
Commander, I have 2 follow-up questions, if that's okay. Commander Harris, first follow-up question. Earlier in your testimony, you mentioned that a mariner had made a request to bring one of the buoys back on station. Can you explain that process in terms of how can a mariner communicate concerns regarding aids to navigation to your office?
So there are several different ways. So a lot of times it comes through the units that are on scene. So in this case, the station that is located in Uquinta Bay, a mariner would approach the station and let them know and have a discussion about the configuration of the aids navigation in the area, and then the station would pass that information along to our office and pass the contact information along to the mariner so that we can call and have that conversation. There is also, they can reach out to us through the local notice to mariners website. It's a publicly available website or not website, but email address to mariners. They can email us directly and we'll take a look at it. And then they they can also call a Coast Guard Command Center, would be able to take that report and pass it along to us as well.
Thank you, sir. Second question. Did the lapse in appropriations affect aids to navigation operations and waterway management activities?
So I do have 7 civilians in my office. 6 of those civilians were furloughed during the lapse in appropriation. So for a 5-week period, we were short about half our staff. So that definitely impacted what material we were able to cover down on to some extent. It also impacted our aid to navigation response. So our units regularly go out and service the aids to navigation, ensure that they're watching properly. And the directive during the lapse of appropriation was that standard servicing of aids to navigation was to be stopped. And we were only to send the units out in the event of aid to navigation discrepancy to correct that discrepancy.
Mr. Riley?
Good afternoon, Commander.
Definitely, sir.
In the last decade, has the Dakota Bay Harbor Safety Committee communicated with the Coast Guard regarding any desired changes to aids to navigation in the harbor or outside the harbor?
I am unaware of any requested changes in the last decade.
In preparation for this board hearing, was the board given an opportunity to interview you?
I was available to be interviewed. I spoke to Commander Denny briefly on the phone, but no official interview.
Were you represented by counsel during the interview by Commander Denny?
No, I was not.
So for the record, we did not have an official interview. It was an administrative phone call to tell him the list of broad topics.
Other than what this board has been asked to do, and part of that apparently involves waterways management, are you aware of any other assessment by any Coast Guard office regarding an evaluation of whether aids to navigation in any way were a contributing factor to the casualty on January 8th, 2019?
I'm unaware of anything besides what this investigative body has been doing to look into this incident.
You described the AIS transmitter at the station, which can create an image on AIS receivers for up to 4 aids to navigation. And I may have missed it. One of them was the entrance, the YB buoy. You got the 2 ranges. Was there a 4th one that was used?
No, I don't think the 4th slot is filled at this time. So right now it's limited to the AIS aids that were in place. Actually looking at the chart right now, Light 4 was also an AIS aid. The YB buoy was Light 4.
Thank you, Commander. Thanks, Commander. That's all I have.
Mayor Harris, thank you again for your testimony. You are now released as a witness from this formal hearing. We appreciate your cooperation. If I later determine that this board needs additional information from you, I will contact you through your counsel. If you have any questions about this investigation, you may contact the investigation reporter, Lieutenant Newport. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
For the record, it is about 2:54 p.m. Commander Harris was our last witness scheduled for today. So we will go ahead and close the record for today and reconvene tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. in the morning in the same space. Thank you.
The Senate's and prayers go out to the family of Robert Maxwell. Courtesy of the Senate, remonstrances. Message from the Governor.
To the Senate President, the Governor has approved and signed the following bills: Senate Bill 38, 376, 423, 424, 509, 580, 593, 50, 69, 686, 729, 753, 9, 31, and 39.
Message from the House.
Mr. President, the House has passed House Bill 3063, 3022, Senate Concurrent Resolution 28 and 20, concurrence amendments repassed House Bill 2524, concurrence amendments and adopted House Concurrent Resolution 2, passed House Bill 3173, House Concurrent Resolution 30 and 36, concurrence amendments repassed House Bill 2040 and 2094, passed House Bill 2876, Senate Bill 4371, 109, 128, 136. Mr. President, the Speaker has signed House Bill 2096, 2593, 2625, 2682, 2992, House Bill 2524, House Concurrent Resolution 2, Senate Concurrent Resolution 20 and 28, and House Bill 2040 and 2094.
Reports from committees in accordance with SR 8.551, Committee Summary Number 131 was distributed to members May 6th, 132 distributed May 8th, 133 and 134 were distributed May